Good evening, I'm Tabitha Ewing. I teach here at Bard, and I work doing a little administrative work down in the city at Bard High School Early College. This is the last panel of the evening, and I'm going to keep the introductions very short because we're under a very serious time constraint. One of our panelists has to leave at exactly 6:29. So we are going to move forward rather hastily, even though they merit much more consideration than this brief introduction will allow. To my immediate left is Rob Riemen, who is founder, president, and CEO of the Nexus Institute, founder and editor of Nexus, a journal of essays for cultural philosophy. He writes on cultural philosophy, and most notably, he wrote a book that many of you may know called The Nobility of Spirit, A Forgotten Ideal. Yale has published a translation of this work from the original Dutch, and soon to arrive are going to be Italian translations and German translations. You will probably already know that this book is highly recommended by our Peruvian novelist who won the Nobel Prize this year, Llosa. And we welcome him here today to talk about, we imagine, from a liberal perspective, the ideals of humanism. Very interested in his contribution to today's discussion. Farther to my left is William Connolly, also known as Bill Connolly. He's a leading political theorist and worked at a number of universities, Ohio, Amherst, most currently Johns Hopkins University, where he was departmental chair for political science. He is currently the Krieger-Eisenhower professor and author of many books. Ones you'll know are Pluralism and more recently Neuropolitics, Thinking, Culture, and Speed, which addresses film. I'm not going to say another word about either because I know you all want to hear from them, and I'd like to leave some time for questions. So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Might as well go with So this is the, am I on? I am on. This is the closing panel, and so I want to thank Roger Berkowitz and the students and others for organizing this conference. We've all really enjoyed it, those of us who were invited, and I hope others have too. And since it's the last panel, I'm hoping that everybody in the audience is as worn down as I am. Otherwise, it won't be fair. I did not call myself a postmodernist in the heyday of that movement, though I was often called one by those who had only a 2 or 3 slot system of labeling. I did not, despite attractions to its appreciation of ambiguity, the complexity of discourse, and the inability of any theory so far to secure its own foundations. From my perspective, it eschewed positive metaphysical speculation too much, something that is essential. It tended to depreciate ethics in general because of its dissatisfaction with Kantian morality. And as I would now put it, it ignored too much the dicey relations between an expanding capitalism and a variety of non-human force fields. Today, for what it is worth, and I'm not saying it's worth that much, I don't call myself a post-humanist or a transhumanist or an advocate of smooth exponential curves either. That designation risks sending the message that you do not care enough about the fragility of things for the human estate today. And the title of my little talk, it's only 15 minutes, is Cosmic Pluralism and the Fragility of Things. I am nonetheless a friendly critic of what Charles Taylor calls exclusive humanism, for reasons that are very different from Taylor's. An exclusive humanist is one who contends that the human estate monopolizes the powers of effective agency, creativity, and feeling in the cosmos, contrasting itself mostly with the strong theological view that invests agency, freedom, and so forth in a God, the very view that Taylor says humanists depend upon. Exclusive humanism, to me, is too often drunk on the project of human agency, of human enactment, of human knowledge, and of human potential to be in charge. Too often inattentive to our involvement with other systems and forces that have differing degrees of agency, powers of self-organization, and unpredictability in themselves. And they had those well before we started interfering in them. So I resist exclusive humanism when it becomes excessive, though I can be an ally at times. I also contend against a materialist reduction of humanity to a field of objects to be explained by fixed laws, and I worry about any theistic rendering organized around the idea of a providential cosmos oriented to human beings alone. I worry about all three of those things. Several theologies are not reducible to that view. My buddies and I don't have too many of them, my buddies and I contend that the cosmos itself consists of heterogeneous force fields that periodically interact to produce new things for good and or ill. Many of those fields convey some degree of agency and or powers of metamorphosis, even if it is only a whisper in some cases. What then should we call ourselves? Well, perhaps we could call ourselves cosmic pluralists, to honor William James, the author of a book called A Pluralistic Universe. A Pluralistic Universe. If so, we might treat Hesiod, Sophocles, Lucretius, and Spinoza as noble forerunners in partial and different ways, and James, Bergson, Whitehead, Deleuze, and to some extent Nietzsche as our patron saints. That's a good start if you take my point of view on things. But there's still a problem. This is part of the problem. There's still a problem. Not even enough of our patron saints have perhaps come to terms sufficiently with the real fragility of things today. That is with how the acceleration, intensification, and expansion of capitalism, a word we haven't heard too much about, capitalism, the expansion of capitalism creates significant and multiple dangers for the human estate in its complex relations to a variety of non-human force fields with differential powers of metamorphosis themselves. In the domain of science, the closest allies of cosmic pluralists are devotees of complexity theory in neuroscience, chemistry, evolutionary biology, geology, ecology, and climatology. Stuart Kauffman, Ilya Prigogine, Lynn Margolis, Rizzolatti, the discoverer of mirror neurons somebody was talking about earlier today, and Fred Peirce all speak to us. Complexity theory, for me, trumps classical conceptions of science and thereby helps to alter our sense of our relation with other forces in the cosmos. Such a theory, when placed in the contemporary context of advanced capitalism and cosmic pluralism, invites humanists to become more modest about their own uniqueness and the powers of the human estate, to appreciate unpredictability, because there's unpredictability everywhere. It invites theists to treat their God as a participant in a world of becoming, as William James did, rather than an omnipotent governor of the cosmos. And it invites post-humanists to recover care and a sense of modesty about the powers and place and highest potential of the human estate. Names matter. Complexity theory, as I receive it, has three major components. First, the theme of a cosmos composed of multiple heterogeneous force fields interacting in various ways with each other and with the human estate. Second, the theme of pre-adaptations in such fields which sow unpredictable seeds from which creative evolution might occur in the field as its environment changes. And third, the theme of Poincare resonances, which during periods of disequilibrium in this or that zone might accelerate to generate new formations in the zones of climate, ocean currents, species change, disease transmission, capitalism, and so forth. Today I only focus on the first element, multiple interacting force fields with differing degrees of agency. By a force field, I mean any energized, temporally inflected mode of organization that has some degree of autonomy. A tornado is a non-designed machinic force field with some degree of self-organizational power. As that sublime nameless one speaking out of the whirlwind in the book of Job may well have realized. It is undesigned and machinic, rather than designed and mechanistic. It is undesigned, and it's not a design machine. The machinic elements exist in the world separate from our organization of them. The universe itself is composed of innumerable, inter-involved, open force fields moving at different speeds, expressing different levels of viscosity, and producing different degrees of efficacy. These include, for starters, bacterial, ocean current, geological, civilizational, neuronal, ethical, disease, sunspot, species evolutionary, gravitational, economic, radioactive, climactic, electrical, magnetic, and religious fields. You may think I've lumped some things together. We can talk about that later. A period of disequilibrium in one can be triggered by new contact between it and another, as when an accelerating and expanding capitalist system and climate system meet. Everything has changed since that happened. It's when the self-maintaining capacities of the soil in one region meet new intensities of market demand and climate change. It's when a shower of asteroids set on one temporal field hits the Earth, wiping out those rather intelligent dinosaurs who had just predicted a rosy future for their estate based upon an exponential smooth graph into the future. When I wrote that this morning, I thought it was kind of funny, but then as the day went on, I realized by the time I got up here, it was going to be a cheap joke, but nonetheless. It's when a flock of birds set on one schedule encounters a plane set on another. It's when the institutional theory of species evolution embedded in university life encounters faith in a creator God advanced by media talking heads and intense church congregations. It's when a flu or AIDS virus carried by one species jumps into the human estate to change a pattern of inheritance or set a new plague into motion or enable the human in a different way. It's when the Gulf Stream encounters a shift in climate and or salt content in the water around it and changes course to induce a shift in the climate of Europe. It's when a bee population set on one temporal course encounters pesticide and fungi movements set on two others, threatening the connection between crop growth and bee pollination, and so on endlessly. On this view, agency is distributed, albeit very unevenly, between and across multiple systems as they interact, with the human estate neither holding a monopoly on it nor able to master all the zones that impinge upon it and or become partially infused into it. There is no dichotomy here. There are multiple distinctions of degrees of agency, powers of metamorphosis, feeling, and so forth. No dichotomy. The conjunction between cosmic pluralism, advanced capitalism, and a sense of the fragility of things may pull you a bit closer to Hesiod and Sophocles than to the culturally enclosed theories of John Rawls, Milton Friedman, and Ernesto Laclau. Check out those gods or forces and plagues the next time you consult Sophocles. It also may jostle the notions of science, nature, and human bodies that Hannah Arendt offers, at least in some of her work, while you continue to appreciate her ideas of the banality of evil, natality, and the politics of enactment. If you embrace simultaneously cosmic pluralism, concern about the intensification of capitalism, and care for the fragility of the human estate in its internal and external relations with multiple force fields, You may seek ways to find and augment our sensitivity to the world around us because we are so crude as unique agents. As composers such as John Luther Adams and David Rothenberg do when they synthesize the soundscapes of Alaska or create a sonata with a set of whales. Or the biochemist Jim Jaminski does when he amplifies the vibration of yeast to let us hear how it feels when composed and how it feels when under stress. Here science, art, and augmented human sensitivity work together. So consider, as my only example, Jaminski's experiment with yeast. Yeast emit vibrations that are potentially available to human hearing, but the amplitude is too low to our very crude senses. So he increases the amplitude to let us hear the soothing sounds it emits. Then he pours vodka on the yeast. The sounds now change. Here is what the biologist says. It screams. It doesn't like it. Of course, yeast produces alcohol, as in beer production, but if you put strong alcohol, like Absolute vodka on it, I don't know why you picked that, if you like, then it screams. It screams. It doesn't like it. End of quote. The yeast has a capacity to feel, and we coarse humans, limited by our crude, unabated capacities to hear, see, feel, think, and judge, can acquire new alertness to the pluralistic cosmos by periodically augmenting those capacities artificially and artistically, as perhaps the seer Tiresias did when he listened to those birds in the plays of Sophocles. Cosmic pluralism encourages you to become more sensitive, self-experimental, and exploratory with respect to multiple imbrications between the human estate and the larger world of open force fields in which it is set. For me, then, it is, let's see, that's one, yeah. To expand and augment our agency as sensitivity, instead of merely repeating like puppets that we are agents with unique powers of feeling and forgiveness. One need today is to become more attuned to scientific work that expands our grasp of other force fields and artistic work that stretches the human sensorium, both, indeed, in relation to each other. For me, then, it is important to acknowledge a degree of open-ended species provincialism tied up with experiments to magnify our sensitivity to other force fields, and to appreciate much more our close entanglements with multiple non-human force fields inside and outside us, with differing degrees of agency and unpredictability. But even as we do these things, we also must become more militant with respect to the impossible hubris of neoliberal capitalism. We must become more wary of the tendencies toward hubris in some versions of exclusive humanism. And we must become critical of the narcissism about the human estate built into some of the most aggressive and exclusionary theologies. As you carry out such assignments, you must also seek to forge creative alliances with those humanists, post-humanists, and theists who are spiritually prepared to support deep pluralism, because that is the only possibility today without massive violence. The problem, however, is that the elements in this double assignment do not mesh well together. To expand our horizons and augment our sensitivities along some dimensions clashes with the demand to become more outspoken and in some cases more militant with respect to the cultural forces of hubris and deniability. How do you negotiate this dilemma? I don't know. It seems to me, however, to be a tension built into the contemporary condition itself, with its combination of capitalist intensification and acceleration, the growing fragility of things in our relations with other force fields, and the self-denial so carefully cultivated by numerous constituencies today. The point is that coming to terms more actively with the contemporary imbrications between capitalism, multiple non-human force fields, and the real fragility of things, at least might possibly be a good place to start. Thank you. Here's an open.
I'm not only coming from Europe, I'm also a European humanist. And my examples, my approach will be from that tradition. Let me start with a quote. After the quote, I'll tell you where the quote comes from. The mind is our capacity to transform. Our emotional life can be turned into a work of art. The mind creates new spiritual needs, which make it possible for us to transcend our physical instincts and to be more than animals. The mind has given us awareness of time, of past and future. It allows us to look ahead, to imagine the possible, and to transcend the moment. What is more, it allows man to step outside himself to empathize with another. Every human being possesses the mental capacity of observing and criticizing his own values and deeds. But the human mind has fallen into disfavor. We have become less sensitive. Modern man needs noise, constant excitement, wants to satisfy his needs. And since we become more and more insensitive, we look for even coarser ways of satisfying our need for excitement. We have become addicted to events. If nothing has happened to us one day, we feel empty. There is nothing in the paper, we note, disappointed. We have been poisoned by the idea that something must happen. We have become obsessed with speed and quantity. Ships cannot be big enough. Cars and planes cannot be fast enough. The idea of the absolute priority of large numbers, an idea whose naivete and vulgarity are evident, or so I hope, is one of the characteristics of modern humanity. We have handed in our free time. I do not mean chronological time, our free days, but our inner peace, our freedom from everything, the mental distance to the world which we need in order to create space for the most delicate moments and elements of our lives. We allow ourselves to be directed by speed, by moments. Everything needs to be done now, and by impulses. Sustainability is no longer strived for. Farewell cathedral, which took 3 centuries to construct. Farewell masterpiece, which needs a lifetime of experience and attention in order to reach perfection. We allow our lives to be lived for us. We have subjected to our telephones, our work and fashion. Life becomes more and more uniform. The way we look, our characters, they all have to resemble each other. And mediocrity always tends to imply a change for the worse. One of the most striking features of today's world is superficiality. We hover between being superficial and being worried. We have the greatest toys humanity ever had. So much entertainment, so many toys, but such concerns, such panic. Less and less mental exertion is asked of us. Thinking is done for us. Besides, our intellect is becoming more and more specialized. Because of the demands put by the technological developments, society needs even more professionals, replaceable intellectuals. A Shakespeare, Bach, Descartes, poets and thinkers, irreplaceable intellectuals are no longer welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a quote of Paul Valéry, which he wrote 19 years ago in 1920. 90 years ago, in 1920, we already got a full description of how the human being, seduced by the siren song of technology, is in the process of losing its human spirit. Compare his time, 90 years ago, with our time, and it is obvious that parallel to the expansional growth of technology, there is an expansional loss of the human spirit. And I thought that Sherry Turkle made very explicit remarks about it yesterday. Paul Valéry had a deep-seated fear that with the loss of the human spirit, there will also be, and the loss of the personality and becoming all more and more uniform individuals, we may easily forget what it means to be human, what the true greatness of human being is all about. So what is the greatness of man? What defines the human being? This indeed became a question in the inhuman age of totalitarianism. The question already was addressed by Vasily Grossman in his wonderful novel, Life and Fate. If you do not know the novel, it is about the scientist Victor Strum, who always has fought his whole life against the regime of Stalin, because that's the time in which the story is told. Yet at a certain day, he got a phone call from Stalin himself. Stalin had the habit of making phone calls. And Stalin, comrade, how are you doing? Da, 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 da. And so at a certain moment, Stalin asked him, what is it that I can do for you? And at the end of the conversation, Stalin said, no worries, comrade. I'll give you the power, the money, the resources, everything you need. You will be fine. The next day, Sturm was confronted with the fact that he was asked to sign a letter. And in this letter, 2 of his colleagues were accused of treason, which meant they would be sent to death. He knew it was not true. But he also knew that if he would not sign that letter, he would have lost 24 hours after he was promised everything. He would have lost the money, the power, the status, the resources, everything. So he signs. And then Grossman writes, that night Sturm did not sleep. He felt pain near his heart. Where did this terrible oppression come from? He had gained power, but he had lost his inner freedom. With horror he realized he was incapable of guarding and protecting his own soul. A power had grown in him that was turning him into a slave. He had committed an act of cowardice. He had thrown a rock at miserable, defenseless people. His affection toward his daughter, his dedication to his wife, his love for his girlfriend, his happiness, his work, his beautiful science, all had disappeared. His heart was empty. Why had he committed this terrible sin? Everything in the world was insignificant compared to what he had lost. Everything is insignificant compared